Rishi Sunak has met with the far-right Prime Minister of Italy, and the two leaders got on like a house on fire.
I wanted to pay tribute to you for your very careful handling of the Italian economy, which has brought stability in uncertain times. And I think the values between our two countries are very aligned, which is why we can work so well together on shared challenges, whether it's responding to Putin's illegal invasion in Ukraine, where again I pay tribute to your leadership, but also tackling illegal migration, which is something that is common to both of us.
Tackling traffickers and illegal migration is something that your government is doing very well. I'm following your work. Yes, I do absolutely agree with your work. And I think there are many things that we can do together. For the problem we have to face is the external dimension. It regards European Union and posing this problem, but I think UK can help on this work a lot.
Of course, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy party comes out of the neo-fascist tradition in Italy, so her praise of Sunak's approach to migration should raise alarm bells. But Fraser Nelson in The Telegraph has told us not to worry. So he said, Giorgia Meloni, Italy's far-right PM, doesn't seem so dangerous after all. He says Rishi Sunak has an ally in the Italian leader who has proven surprisingly moderate in government. So nothing to be worried about there. Is Fraser Nelson right, though? Should we relax about the Brothers of Italy and Giorgia Meloni? I'm joined now by David Broder, Jacobin Europe editor and author of Mussolini's Grandchildren, Fascism in Contemporary Italy. How extreme is Giorgia Meloni?
Giorgia Meloni is undoubtedly a far-right politician. I also read the article you mentioned by Fraser Nelson yesterday in The Telegraph, who said maybe 5 years ago, Giorgia Meloni used to talk about ethnic substitution, so used to talk about great replacement theory, the conspiracy supposedly headed by usurers and speculators and Marxists to replace the white Italian population with immigrants. But Fraser Nelson said, well, maybe she doesn't really talk about that much anymore, so what's to worry? So I think his piece is kind of denying really that the far right could exist, and just says, well, anyone calling people fascists, that's just the alarmist left. But I think that what she represents really is a radicalization of the right, in which parties like the UK Tories are increasingly happy to have warm relations with parties from a fascist and collaborationist background, ones that promote things like great replacement theory, an obsession with civilizational decline, and the fight against it. Only last week, we had a minister of Meloni's government, indeed her brother-in-law, again warned that Italy needs to boost birth rates in order to avoid surrendering to ethnic substitution. So I think, the extremism of the party, it's not a return to the 1930s. As you say, I have a book called Mussolini's Grandchildren. It's not called Mussolini's Clones, but we are seeing a party which is obsessed with the idea of the threats to the homogenous Italian nation, the destruction of the family, and the supposed conspiracy of finance and Marxists to bring that about. So I think in that sense, we can, of course, say that it is a radicalization on the right.
We're still talking in the realms of language, though, aren't we, and discourse? So you're sort of talking about how the discourse is more extreme than what we're used to. It's a sort of fascistic way of speaking they have. Has it translated into policy? Are there sort of policies you can point to of the current Italian government and you say, oh, that's a bit fascist?
One thing which very much isn't just rhetoric, is the fact that the children of immigrants who are born in Italy aren't entitled to Italian citizenship. And it's actually very hard for them to get citizenship. And that's because of the Italian right's successful resistance against the principle. It was discussed 5 years ago. So they've successfully resisted that. We've also seen the current Italian government, so far, of course, this party has been in office before with the Lega under Salvini and together with Berlusconi, of course. So just to take the last few months, we've seen it strip back the special protection, allowing asylum seekers to remain in Italy. And at the same time, it's probably one of the most radical things it's done, isn't just in the field of migration and so on, but it's actually got rid of unemployment benefits. Since 2019, Italy has had a citizen's income, so-called, which is a bit like JSA in Britain, and the government has announced it's going to abolish that. It's legislated that. It's already started to happen, and from 1st of January, that will no longer exist. Apart from its properly sort of fascistic roots, this is a party that basically upholds sort of bootstraps and indeed even Reaganite economics, and has a kind of culture war against the so-called lazy, unemployed young people and so on. The getting rid of unemployment benefits, in the clip you played, Sunak was very kind of chummy with Meloni, praising her also for bringing Italy to a sort of difficult economic phase, difficult period of instability. But of course, it's not providing stability for the millions of people who are going to no longer be able to receive benefits when they're unemployed.
I think Italy also has quite high unemployment rates. Like, are people just going to be completely destitute? Is there some other support mechanism that's going to exist?
The family, of course, is one support mechanism. The other is they'll probably introduce some form of workfare. I mentioned Lollobrigida. In fact, I didn't say him by name, but he's the agriculture minister who's Meloni's brother-in-law. It's interesting, actually, the way he puts it really does link together the issue of unemployment and the so-called lazy people who don't want to get a job and immigration. He gave a speech 2 weeks ago where he said that unemployed people who are receiving benefits now should be doing farm work because they might think that, well, we can just import slaves, as he said, to do the jobs instead. But instead, Italians should be doing it. So the party doesn't just say foreigners are coming and taking our jobs. It's also saying it's the fault of lazy Italians who want to be paid too much, who are therefore creating a demand for immigration. What they're talking about now is to introduce some sort of workfare and also to make the unemployment benefits that do exist only available to people with kind of specific health conditions and so on.
In Britain at the moment, we obviously have this sort of enormous controversy about small boats crossing the channel. That's kind of old hat in Italy, right? So there's been many more people arriving in Italy for a much longer period of time by boat via the Mediterranean. I think, the political problem this poses is that it's very visible and governments can really sort of mobilize an emotive response to this. I mean, is there anything from the recent history of sort of Italy on this issue that you think people in Britain could learn? What can we take from the experience of Italy in terms of how progressives, let's say, should respond to the politics of small boats?
It should certainly be said that in Italy, so-called centre-left governments have also pursued a repressive policy towards migration. It's not only the far right doing it. Of course, it's partly because of their political pressure. Of course, Britain has its plan to send asylum seekers and other migrants to Rwanda. But Italy has this relationship with Libya and with sort of North African regimes who are meant to police migration to suppress it on their behalf. In Italy, the kind of debate around immigration has moved very far towards this idea that it's actually kind of humanitarian to stop the boats even trying to set off. The Meloni government has started this kind of, or resumed this sort of war on so-called people smugglers, and they're trying to frame it as an issue of people smugglers are exploiting migrants and putting them in danger. There was an interesting report in January which showed that of the people who have been sort of arrested in Italy as people smugglers, most of them were just kind of ordinary migrants who were sort of put in charge of a dinghy at the last minute, this kind of thing. So I think for the left or progressives, as you say, it's very important to resist this kind of false humanitarianism and argue, of course, for safe routes for migrants to reach Italy in this case, or in Britain for you over there. Of course, the Italian government hasn't actually made its own the Rwanda policy, and in the Fraser Nelson article you mentioned, he kind of says, well, who's to say which is more moderate and so on. But of course, firstly, there is repression of migrants coming to Italy, also thanks to relations with various kind of North African states and Turkey as well, of course. And only today, Meloni said that the British policy on Rwanda shouldn't even be called deporting people, because how can you deport someone who's an illegal immigrant? So the very fact that they're illegal means that they can't be deported. I think in the Italian case, there's this sort of specific tie with this language of ethnic substitution, great replacement theory type ideas, which seem less prominent in British politics. But of course, they could also take root there, I'm sure.